Hey everyone, Joe here. I have so much to say about Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, so prepare for some violent topical whiplash. While you're here, remember to leave a like below, it really helps out the channel, and if you haven't subscribed, just go ahead and do that. It doesn't hurt at all, unless you're into that sort of thing, in which case, hey. Oh, and obviously this video will spoil the entirety of Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, so if you're planning on playing the game blind, go do that and then come back here to organize your thoughts. And maybe leave me a comment with your experience below. Senua's Sacrifice is the first installment in the Hellblade series created by Ninja Theory. It explores one picked woman's battle with psychosis as she journeys into what may or may not actually be Helheim to save her lover's soul from the gods of the Northmen. What struck me about this game from the second the intro sequence faded in was the choice to honestly portray this warrior's experience as real from the player's perspective. Senua's psychosis and the visual and auditory hallucinations that come with it aren't just cheap tricks used for jump scares and empty mechanics in this game, they're also central to the aesthetic experience. In the Hellblade feature, a sort of behind-the-scenes documentary produced by Ninja Theory themselves, they talk at length about the desire to make a game that not only treated this subject of mental suffering with respect, but that would help the player to empathize with and understand Senua's struggle in a deeper and more meaningful way. This documentary is in addition to their thorough backlog of dev diaries on their YouTube channel, by the way, which is definitely worth a sub, link in the doobly-doo. And it's that approach that I think makes this game so special. I could blather here for quite a while about all of the things that I love about this game, but I'm going to save that for later and go ahead and get into the plot. So here we go. What really happened in Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice?
Bravery only means something to those afraid of death. Senua's fear runs far, far deeper.
We begin with our protagonist, Senua, gently paddling a dugout canoe through an eerie swamp. We're given some background about Senua by the loudest of the voices dancing around our head here.
Oh, she heard us.
This one acts as a sort of narrator throughout the game.
There's no going back.
Acknowledging our presence among the rest of the voices, Senua makes it clear she doesn't intend on coming home. After a panicked dash through a bog, we learn of our hero's quest. Her
Dear beloved, Dillion
has lost his soul to the gods of the Northmen, and we're going to help Senua venture into Helheim and win his soul back. The views throughout this game are just incredible, but the bridge to Helheim is so understated, and it's almost more unsettling as a result. We'll also be coming across these rune markers as we progress, which provide some exposition and world building as they trigger memories of stories Senua grew up hearing. The lack of a UI being what it is, it took me a frustrating amount of time to climb this ladder, but I think that's just par for the course with me. You can watch my video on Half-Life if you don't know what I'm talking about. After finding a secret path, we're introduced to another voice.
I was just hiding.
Hiding in the darkness is Druth, the Fool, whom Senua met in the woods. We'll learn more about that later. He makes her a deal to provide her with knowledge so long as he can travel with her, and she accepts.
Carry my stories with you, and together we will make the Northmen feel our fury.
I can't say enough how good the voice acting is in this game. It's here that we also learn how to focus, a core mechanic we'll be using to change the world around Senua as she travels. Arriving at the gate to Hell, Senua turns to face us, and we are forced into the unsteady role of her oppressor, her own mind, as she begs for Dillion's life.
You took him from me.
Pleading with the darkness, Senua is shown a vision of what may come, and we get our first taste of combat. Failing to win this battle, she now knows the stakes. The further she goes, the more she fails, the more the darkness will grow until it consumes her completely. This implies a sort of hardcore mode, but as someone who is objectively terrible at games with combat, I died quite a bit, and my game was never reset, so I think that may be more of a misdirect to build tension. Anyways, Druth tells us here about Surtur and Valravn.
The god of fire, Surt, and the god of illusion, Valravn.
Two powerful gods of the Northmen. We'll need to
Spill their blood.
if we hope to open the gate to Hell. So that's what we do. When I first started writing the script, I considered doing a sort of Lindsay Ellis H. Bomber Guy style analysis of how this game handles mental illness and all of that stuff. But then I felt like maybe that was a little bit out of my wheelhouse, so I wanted to do a more traditional plot overview like the rest of my What Really Happened videos. And after rewriting the script a couple times, I decided, ¿por qué no los dos?
And now for something completely different.
Joe's Commentary Corner. Diegesis is...
Wrong!
Well, it's not technically wrong, but when you're talking about media like video games, diegesis usually means giving the player an interior view of the world. To simplify this concept, and in doing so completely remove all nuance from the discussion, diegesis, or diegetic elements, are basically when the player's experience mirrors that of the character they're controlling. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a gnat that's flying around here, and it's just... So health bars, inventory systems, menu screens, these are all extra diegetic or non-diegetic elements. Things like characters, interactables, and anything else that doesn't break the fourth wall are considered intra-diegetic or just diegetic. It's probably one of my favorite storytelling methods, which may be why I like VR so much. And this game has it in spades, especially when it comes to sound design. Ninja Theory recorded diegetic voice hearing, which is a common symptom in those who deal with psychosis. Those who experience voice hearing sometimes have to deal with pestering from what they may interpret as angry spirits, guiding whispers from guardian angels, clues about the world around them from alien radio frequencies. It sounds like I'm being silly or facetious here, but these auditory hallucinations are more common than you might think. In the right state of mind or intoxication, most of us have heard something like this before. And importantly for Hellblade, that experience feels real to the individual in the moment. Because Senua hears these voices, deriding her at times and celebrating her at others, the player also hears these voices. They're real by any reasonable definition to the player, constantly breathing down your neck, and at times providing vital tips. Now, Ninja Theory didn't have to put this amount of effort in. The voices could just appear whenever you needed a clue and fade into nothing elsewhere. But instead, the player is forced into Senua's shoes, and in some very small way is made more aware of what it's like to live with psychosis. I'm not equating playing Hellblade to doing actual social work or studying applied psychology, but I do wish more devs would focus on this kind of thoughtful design. In addition to diegetic sound, Hellblade also uses diegetic visuals as a method of solving puzzles with the focus mechanic. When Senua focuses her mind, calming down for a moment to observe the world from a certain perspective, the world actually changes, warping to fix bridges, open doors, or even move through time. Just as with voice hearing, the player experiences this change as Senua does, complete with visual aberrations and at times psychedelic post-processing. We also get to see diegetic versions of these spirits that visit Senua throughout the game, especially in the form of the full-motion video gaffer Druth, but we'll get to that later. For now, on to part 2.
She needs to challenge the gods.
She has to fight 2 gods first.
2 gods?
2 gates.
Which will she choose first?
Suicid. The fire giant has answered.
I chose to go after Surtur first, but I assume it doesn't matter. Shortly after entering Surtur's domain, we come across a strange face behind a waterfall. This is Senua's mother, who offers some soothing words.
There is nothing wrong with seeing the world the way you do.
Moments later, we get into a little skirmish with the darkness before we learn that both Senua and Druth are deeply familiar with the scent of burning human flesh.
I can still smell it.
Druth continues to share his experience with his own darkness as Senua presses on. We learn that
Only a sacrifice will stoke the fires of Muspel.
so Senua must seek out these fire shrines to open each door into Surtur's realm, focusing on the memory of her burning fellows and reliving the terror again. Druth advocating for submersion therapy is about as heavy-handed as this game gets when it comes to Senua overcoming her mental distress.
Do your gods answer your prayers, Senua? I asked the gods for mercy, all of them, even theirs. None answered. In the end, I set myself free.
The rest of the game generally leans more toward awareness than preaching, but I do love a good nod toward existentialism. Finding meaning or relief after abandoning one's religion, family, or culture is something I, and I think a lot of us, can deeply relate to. It helps ground some of Senua's struggle, I think. After solving more perspective puzzles, and realizing my computer was on fire trying to record this game at 60 FPS, we got another rousing speech from Druth.
Let it collapse, and have the courage to shed your tears.
As Sinua explores what is probably supposed to be a recreation of her own village, Druth shares the story of his escape from the Northmen.
The fool ran into the fire. They left me for dead.
Manipulating their fear of Surtur's wrath to give himself an out. It was just after his escape that Sinua met him in the wilds, likely recovering from some terrible burn wounds and smoke inhalation. Sinua makes one last run through the fires of Surtur's realm before she is wreathed in flame and collapses. The player is briefly put into the role of Dillion, Sinua's lover, as she goes unconscious. In this dream state, Sinua promises to come back to him and awakens to face Surtur himself. As my computer literally becomes hot enough to cook ramen.
And I will achieve you from the world and forever be in your debt.
These boss fights are very Souls-like, so if you're into rolling away from enemy attacks before rolling back in for a weapon combo, and lather, rinse, repeat, you'll enjoy the combat here. Swiftly dispatching the fire giant, Sinua has another vision/memory, this time of Druth's passing, and we head back to Hell's Door.
Oh no, it's another terrible segue.
Joe's Commentary Corner. Hey, you thought that whole Joe's Commentary Corner thing was just a one-time bit, didn't you? I'm sorry, I just can't resist. And I wanted to share with you my love for full motion video. You used to see this technique used in old point-and-click games all the time, such as the Myst series, or later Infocom games, which I've been streaming lately, by the way, where a live actor would be inserted into the game, rather than taking the time to animate a character model. Playing through older games, it more often takes me out of the experience than it increases immersion, but it holds a treasured, nostalgic place in my heart. Hellblade makes use of full motion video for, as far as I can tell, every human character except for Sinua. And in this way, I think it's an effective tool to communicate the difference between Sinua's perception of reality and everyone else's. When Druth tells a story, Sinua's mother comforts her, or she relives some trauma, the spirits that make their presence known are rendered in FMV, with heavy post-processing, rather than 3D models, separating them from Sinua not only in physical space, but in the level of objective reality that they inhabit. I strongly recommend watching Ninja Theory's Hellblade feature documentary that I mentioned at the top, as it briefly touches on this topic. I think that's everything I had to say on this one. I just want more people to be aware of full motion video in all its glory. More of that, please, Ninja Theory. Okay, thanks, bye!
Valravan, ancestor of the seers and master of ravens. He hunts his prey with his powers of illusion and feasts on their remains.
Most of the people in my life are aware, but I don't think I've mentioned it here on YouTube. I deal with something called cyclothymia. It's like a very mild bipolar disorder with long cycles in and out of depression and hypomania. And because of that, this next part of the game got to me in a deep way. In Valravan's domain, it deals a lot with the lies that one is told by their own mind. That bridge isn't crossable, that door won't open for you, there's no way out. That same defense mechanism that some of us develop as a tool to shield ourselves from reality becomes the very chain holding us back from what we could really be, what we could truly achieve. And breaking that chain, facing reality, getting better, means losing control, dropping your guard and fighting head-on instead. Sinua deals with this struggle throughout Valravan's domain, solving visual puzzle after puzzle as she shifts her perception from one reality to another. The seamless transitions as Sinua uses these gates to change perspective here blew my mind. Truly compelling level design. Outside of these environment puzzles, not much happens here honestly. The voices are particularly brutal here though, and my computer continued to shred each frame of this recording. I promise I eventually fixed it. You really feel for Sinua here, and it's a great example of why mental health services are so important. For some people, like myself, the darkness is a small but constant nuisance. For some others, it's life or death. And Sinua, living in the time in which she lived, really has no options for dealing with this kind of problem. After focusing on Valravan's last seal, Sinua has another vision/memory sequence, and with some guidance from the voice of Druth,
Focus! Focus!
Sinua battles Valravan himself. Vanquishing the spirit crow, she continues her quest. On her way back to Hell's Door, we learn more about Sinua's history of being able to see the world differently.
Shifting faces. After a while, she could see the faces everywhere.
And that Sinua's mother had the same gift of sight.
Senua, you have the sight. Just like I do.
She reminds Sinua not to fear the voices that guide her, and it's clear that her mother's absence weighs heavy as Sinua pushes on.
With the mark of Valravan and the mark of Surt, you may cross the bridge over the River of Knives to Helheim.
Truth? Anyone?
There is no one here but me.
Not you.
Did you think that I would let you go? That you lost me back in the wilds? I will never let you go. You can't get rid of me. I am your shadow.
With both the god's marks, Sinua can open the door to the Bridge of Knives. Upon doing so, however, she's greeted by something much more terrifying than a rickety causeway: the darkness itself. The voice of the darkness, which we'll call the shadow occasionally throughout here, reads some unsettling poetry, and I'm just going to play this whole sequence for you.
In this waking nightmare, where all dreams come true, you searched for control, a way to pull through. When you were in love, you left him in tears, to smother your furies and banish your fears. But in darkness they came, through stormy black seas they raided these shores. Do you still hear his screams? And now that you're home, he's so far away. They've taken his soul. To these gods you cannot pray. They can break you, but not your promise. Even death won't keep you apart. Through his darkness you will find him. In your sword still beats a heart. You fought for love unspoilt by your darkness within. You fought for your dreams. Now there's no way to win. In the head of his corpse lies the seat of his soul. So you must carry his vessel to bring him back home.
And now we know what inspired Sinua's quest. She thought she could conquer the darkness when she left for the wilds, but when she returned, the Northmen had already razed her village and flayed her beloved Dillion. From that moment, she fell even deeper into the darkness. The image of her partner's rent flesh seared into her mind, and her kin would never be able to look at her the same. Now that the darkness is making its presence known, it takes on the role of narrator as Sinua crosses the Bridge of Knives to face the next obstacle in this hero's journey. Here at the end of the bridge, we get a satisfying little mini-boss fight with gruesome Beefcake Zombie number 3 and their henchmen. All jokes aside, I really like the character design in this game. The aesthetic is fantastic and consistent, but the combat is a bit dry for me, although now some of the bad guys have shields. After finding some more runes and her mother's face in the side of a roof, Sinua is finally able to cross the Bridge of Knives. Well...
It's Hela.
Yes, the source of the darkness. It's coming.
Okay. That's... That's gonna hurt. I guess this is the goddess of death we're dealing with here. The darkness pesters Sinua in what seems like an attempt to motivate her, before Hell literally slaps Sinua into next Wednesday.
Is this what Hell is? A world shaped by Senua's nightmares. Maybe that's why people feared seeing the world through her eyes. Because if you believe that Senua's reality is twisted, you must accept that yours might be too.
An important point from our narrator voice here, and one of the main focuses of the game, if you don't mind the pun, is that perception is by definition subjective, and therefore objective reality, or neurotypical thinking, has a little less value. Or should at the very least be taken with a grain of salt. The voice of the darkness gets personal here, shouting at Sinua to take her own life if she's too weak to overcome her mental suffering. I know I put a content warning there, but still, if you're someone who deals with these kinds of obsessive, intrusive thoughts, there's a link to the National Suicide Prevention Hotline in the video description. I have known people who have to endure that, so I know that what Sinua is doing here is administering a dose of pain to herself in order to quell the darkness's tempting offer for now. And I just wanted to point out, the way Ninja Theory decided to portray this mental turmoil, without glorification or pageantry, in all its horror, this is the right way to do it. Speaking of which,
Let's bring the energy back up.
Joe's Commentary Corner. I wanted to talk about something I call thoughtful design and take a look at the Hellblade feature that was released alongside of the game. From the onset, Hellblade's development centered around portraying mental illness honestly and with care. Apparently, the Picts, an early Celtic-speaking group of people to whom Sinua fictionally belongs, treated those who saw the world differently as, well, crazy. They sometimes referred to these people as Gelt. As an amateur etymologist, I naturally had to see if this word evolved beyond its Proto-Celtic use, and I wasn't disappointed. In Irish, it's come to just mean lunatic. In Icelandic, its cognate means something akin to barking. Can you imagine being someone dealing with PTSD in a world that thinks that people who are dealing with trauma too deep to handle have simply just taken on demons?
You kind of caught me off guard here, okay?
Oh, well, apparently not much has changed. So it's just as important that video games and other media showcase the truth of mental suffering now. The stigmas that some people grow up with, be it from society, religion, or the need to protect their family's image, can leave some trapped in their own very real hell. To make sure they didn't fall into the common tropes or have a damaging effect on those who deal with mental illness in their lives, Ninja Theory hired consultants in the form of psychiatrist Paul Fletcher, voice hearing expert Charles Fernyhough, and a team of people who have chronic symptoms of psychosis, such as voice hearing. Learning from these individuals not only helped them develop a game that more genuinely represented this experience, but it helped them make something that's more compelling and unique to play, directly informing their decisions in terms of both gameplay and level design. This is thoughtful design in practice. There are now 2 Nats. And I hope that if you're someone who has ambitions of making games, writing stories, or any other kind of media, that you'll take what Ninja Theory learned to heart and try a little thoughtful design for yourself. Now back to the plot.
Why go on when you give everything and face that which torments you, only to find that it is worse than you could have imagined? Why go on? Is it really so weak to ask this?
Defeated after falling from the Bridge of Knives, Sinua hears Dillion's voice beckoning her to continue. We trudge across this shipwreck-ridden shore in pursuit of Dillion's light, coming across a door with a great tree rune on it, until we finally see him in the distance, beneath a great tree. How convenient. This is where we learn how they met. Apparently, Sinua obtained her skill with a sword from watching Dillion dance with his blade and copying their moves. This is a rare moment of hope in her story and helps to explain how important he is to her. Though it quickly turns to bitter fear when we learn that Sinua blames herself for Dillion's death.
You can't put it into words. That moment when you look into the eyes of the one who is supposed to reassure you, make you feel safe. It only takes an instant. Fear swallows you before you have a chance to make sense of it. And darkness becomes a part of who you are.
Arriving at the Great Tree, Sinua learns from the runes that she'll need a god-killing blade to take on Hela. a blade which just so happens to be embedded in the trunk of this tree.
A sword. Take it. Dillion left it for you. Take it. Take it. Take it.
After trying and failing to take the sword, Druth explains a great warrior can reforge Gramr by facing Odin's trials. Oh, Gramr is the sword, by the way. Unfortunately for Senua, this means processing the trauma she's experienced up to this point. Focusing on each shard of Gramr deposited around the tree, Senua is transported to various stages here where she must use more than just her combat skills to pass Odin's trials.
I don't recognize this place. Where are we? Where is she? It feels wrong.
The first of these I attempted was a labyrinth of passages, which Senua has to navigate both by torchlight and by listening for Dillion's voice down each path. This took me more tries than I would like to admit. After arriving at the end of the labyrinth, Senua addresses us directly as Father.
I'm leaving.
It's the darkness. It's speaking through.
No, Dad, it's me. I think I can beat it. In my own way.
I can see the darkness in your eyes, child.
I met a boy.
Boy.
The chieftain's son.
No.
He said he could help me.
It's a trick.
He said I could be normal.
Normal?
Yes.
And his voice should sound familiar at this point. It seems to be the voice of the shadow itself. Senua expresses her love of Dillion, her intention to leave home, and her father puts her down with every word, blaming her for her own suffering before it truly begins, until she returns to the present. The next sort of dungeon I faced on my playthrough was probably the most horrifying in my opinion. Senua is transported into thick, pitch-black darkness.
I'm right here. Can't you see me?
Without her sense of sight, and without the voices that normally plague her every thought, Senua is forced to navigate this strange space through environmental sounds and Dillion's voice alone, only catching brief glimpses of Dillion's specter in order to decide where to go next. As she continues, we learn that Dillion was a genuinely positive influence on Senua. Rather than taking advantage of her, Dillion was a voice of understanding and compassion like none Senua had ever encountered before. As someone who doesn't really play horror games, this part got me. I was genuinely sweating by the end, and that's largely a testament to how effectively this game uses post-processing to instill a mood. With Dillion's guidance, Senua eventually makes it out of this obscure hellscape, the last few minutes of which made me physically ill with stress. We're rewarded once again with a memory.
Your eyes were open, but you were gone.
And when it finally let her go, she could be anywhere, with no memory of how she got there.
Of Dillion acknowledging Senua's return from a dissociative spell. She explains how his voice helped her through the darkness, and we're returned to the Great Tree. The next shard she focuses on transports Senua to a small rocky island in a state of heavy disrepair. After focusing on a giant mask, Senua seems to time travel to a rose-golden past or future version of this island, not yet touched by darkness, or perhaps recovered. The changes she makes here persist into the dark version of the island, so she has to bounce back and forth between the two, as the narrator drives this visual metaphor home.
Dillion taught her to see further, to peek through the cracks and see the worlds of colour stretching away from the gloom. And Senua explored new paths into the unknown.
Basically, the beautiful, daylight-soaked version of the island is the time Senua spent, or would be spending, with Dillion, and the dilapidated, grimdark version is her present turmoil.
How can the gods understand us if they refuse to die themselves?
I agree.
Joe's Commentary Corner. I was having a conversation about this with someone the other day. I come from a pretty religious childhood, growing up in the Baptist backwoods of East Texas, and people without that upbringing often fail to understand how difficult it is for people who grew up in those circumstances to seek out help for mental health issues, or view reality outside the lens of God's creation, or vote for someone other than a Republican. It seems alien to those fortunate enough to grow up without thinking that everyone except for your parents and the guy that shouts at them every Sunday is going to hell. But when you're born into that kind of culture, every fiber of your being must necessarily serve the purpose of furthering the kingdom of God, of living up to being created in His image. It becomes impossible for every small instance of good luck to not be divine intervention, and for every bad thing that happens to you to be the work of demons or evil spirits. Everyone who may counter your understanding of the world must be doing the work of Satan. And if you can't handle it, well, God is doing all He can. He loves you so much. Why can't you love Him enough to just be normal? Oh, you want to go to therapy? What, so some left-wing floozy can corrupt you with her devil talk? God knows what's best for you. You just need to pray and tithe more.
To be honest with you, your whole life is going to be based on whether or not you can control your emotions, or will you allow them to control you? Now, emotions, that's something we all have. Amen? We all have emotions, but sometimes they have us. We were designed by God to master life rather than be mastered by life.
Fortunately, after my high school years of pretending not to be attracted to the other sweaty men in drumline and a college education in psychology and sociology, I was able to spend enough time away from that zealotism I grew up with and develop a more diverse and scientific understanding of the world, after a healthy dose of crippling cognitive dissonance leading to what is likely a lifetime of mental health issues, of course. Religiosity can be dangerous in and of itself, and I say religiosity here instead of religion because all superstitious belief patterns are fundamentally built on the same flawed structure and can lead to the same harmful outcomes. I'm not saying it's all bad, but it can be. And when it is, religiosity can fatally amplify the symptoms of a mental illness, such as psychosis. I'd be interested to know what elements of Senua's religious upbringing you notice throughout the game, if you'd like to talk about it in the comments. To me, it seems like it colors just about every aspect of her experience in these trials. And that sadly made Senua a little more relatable. Anyways, enough about that, we're almost done with the Great Tree.
Can you remember what love feels like?
Look what happens to the thing she loves.
She destroys the thing she loves.
It took me longer than I'd like to admit to complete the first puzzle here, but once you're inside this building, you get a new use for the focus mechanic. And the narrator explains that Senua's neurodivergent thinking gave her
an intuition that made her an exceptional warrior.
We also learn through the narration here of someone named Zinbel. I don't know that it's clear at this point, but Zinbel is her father, a fanatic druid who blamed Senua's mental suffering on demons, spirits, and her own mother's darkness. Side note, Zinbel is sometimes called the Shadow. I'm not at all equating Senua's experience of trauma and abuse with that of every person growing up in a religious household, by the way, but there are some important shades of gray here for you to think about on your own time. Making her way through another rune puzzle, the glowing specter of Dillion calls Senua across a precarious bridge and jumps into the murk below just as she reaches him.
No! No! It's your fault. He's disappeared.
Again, we get more background on Senua and Dillion's relationship dynamic, and Senua continues to blame herself for his death as we head to the last challenge. This one takes us to a strange,
creepy
bog, which Senua remarks is similar to the
Your warrior drowns.
After fixing a bridge, Senua gains access to this downtrodden house. The voice of Dillion calls her to some runes when suddenly, the house transforms into a maze in which you have a limited amount of time to obtain all 3 runes and get out. I got curious the first time because I didn't know what was happening and immediately died by the hand of what seemed to be sentient fire. But after another try, this was a fun change from the relatively slow pace that the game had begun to sink into. Escaping with her life intact, Senua has another flashback.
Senua!
Senua! What happened?
They're blaming me for the plague. They say that I'm cursed. What if they're right?
How would they know such a thing? Are they gods? None of us are. They're just people. Good people, but they're scared. They're afraid of what they can't see. Like children scared of the dark.
Ugh, Dillion tried so hard. Everyone deserves this kind of unconditional love.
Doesn't make them true.
What if my father was right?
You have to step out of this darkness. Let them see who you really are, like I have. You're not a monster.
And you can see why losing Dillion hit her so hard. Leaving behind the teachings of her father, she filled that void with Dillion's love. Just as relying on religion to solve your problems can be unhealthy, relying on a lover, an idol, a political figure, a hero, these things can be just as unhealthy. And even though she didn't truly have a choice, Senua is being forced to deal with the consequences of that reliance. Returning to the heart of the great tree, Senua recovers the god-killing blade Grammar.
You will pay a price for this.
But years later, with Zinbel's parting words still haunting her, the darkness came back with a vengeance.
Okay, you get the metaphor here? Dillion gave Senua the confidence she needed to stand up to her father and go her own way, but in doing so, she was using a borrowed weapon. You see, when your confidence comes entirely from how another person sees you, it goes when that person is no longer in the picture.
Do you see it clearly now, Senua? The suffering you've caused.
This is your fault. You brought this plague to us! You have blood on your hands!
Now, I know this scene at its face seems to negate my point about Dillion's unconditional love for Senua, but I don't think the choice to render this scene in the game engine rather than having another FMV sequence, or the choice to have Dillion's voice fade into the voice of the shadow at the end, are unintentional. I think this was Senua projecting her own irrational guilt instilled by Zinbel, blaming herself for the plague, and we're witnessing this conversation with Dillion through that lens of the darkness. As the darkness gives way, Senua arrives in a dank chasm of what looks like stone and fleshy branches. She obtains a new ability here. Focusing her heavy strike causes shadow enemies to solidify, which is pretty cool. Druth's voice recounts part of a poem about hell.
The corpse waved through itself over the ones I loved. The ship broke up under them. The ship that had sailed from the land of shining fields.
And the voice of the shadow keeps trying to bring Senua down. The fight sequences get more of an emphasis in this chapter, and along with the improved heavy strike, Senua can now focus to slow down time, which helps the combat feel a little more strategic. Amid the writhing mass of dead that make up her surroundings, Senua hears her mother Galena and runs to find her.
Who is it? Galena? Where are you?
The voices in Senua's head join the voice of the shadow, practically begging her to stop fighting and give in to the darkness. Also, just as you learn that new focus ability I mentioned, you're met with a new enemy type that isn't affected by it. Thanks, Ninja Theory. That's totally not fucked up.
It's not too late. She's calling for you. Why don't you join her?
Have I mentioned how good looking this game is yet? Yeah, this battle just kind of keeps going, huh? Anytime now. Eventually, though, Senua makes her way up a handy, glowing flesh vine bridge? I don't know what it is, but it looks cool. After clamoring to meet her mother's dreadful face, Senua has another flashback. This one I'd like to play for you completely.
That night, she gave up on her world to follow in the footsteps of her mother, to go to a place where the darkness couldn't reach her.
Yeah, shit's real.
Look at me.
Do you hear them? They're calling for me.
We've lost so many. And I've lost my father. I can't lose you.
You said it. I have blood on my hands.
I didn't say that. You've done nothing wrong.
Zinbel was right. Everyone will suffer.
Zinbel is a fake. He is a hateful, bitter liar. He's poison.
and his words still haunt you. Who do you trust? Him? Or me?
The hardest battles are fought in the mind. He gave her the sword with which to fight in more ways than one. And she gave him her word, never to surrender.
Man, I thought I was being all smart pointing that out earlier. Anyway, coming out of this psychotherapy session, Senua has a newfound hope and heads back to the door with the Great Tree Rune. After being shouted out by the Shadow earlier, the voices have returned. This time, they take on a persuasive tone, trying to convince Senua they're here to help. Senua enters to see an ancient chamber, complete with flayed bodies and cages, while the voice of Druth begins recounting the tale of Sigurd and Fafnir. The gist being that Fafnir had evil in his heart and betrayed his family, so he was transformed into a dragon. Throughout this chapter, the dragon, or the beast, as the Shadow calls it, hunts Senua down from the darkness. The literal darkness this time. So as long as she stays in the light, Senua will be fine. The visuals when this happens are great, too. In a truly heartbreaking conversation with the Spectre of Galena, we learn the abuse Senua likely endured by her father's hand didn't start with her.
Don't fall for it.
It's me, Senua. It's so loud.
It's not her.
So full of hate.
It's a trap.
I just want to help them. Tell me what to do. Your father wants them to go away, and he only hurts me to silence them. But he's gone now.
They always come back. He says I will die if I go with them. They say that I'm already dead.
It's also even clearer now that the calm, sweet narrator we hear throughout most of the game is Senua's mother, or at least some simulacrum of her. Senua finds the runes necessary to open the door after wandering around this cavernous complex. The Shadow continues to deride Senua for seeking out her mother, and Senua starts to unpack the repressed experience of her mother's death. I can't tell if this shot of the beast is silly or horrifying. It kind of hits me both ways. After running from the beast once more, Senua dives across a collapsing bridge to keep from plummeting to the deep below, but Dillian's skull doesn't make it. And the terror she feels in that moment triggers another memory. This time of her father holding her captive back in the village.
I won't give up. I'm not going to rot in here.
Resolved to continue her quest, Senua heads back into the depths. If this were just a puzzle platformer, I could have enjoyed multiple hours of more complex puzzles in this environment, but this last torch puzzle was pretty satisfying. Oh, and if you mess up, this happens. After one more rune puzzle, Senua makes her way deeper, down a whole bunch of nope, to face the dragon head-on.
No! You're not taking it from me!
Okay, so it turns out the Shadow, which represents Sinbel, is also the dragon, which is called the Beast. I know there are quite a few levels of metaphor happening here, but it tracks. Sinbel betrayed his family for his own purposes, just like Fafnir in the legend that Druth told us at the beginning of the level. Spoiler alert, we'll eventually find out he betrayed them in more ways than one. This is definitely the best boss fight in the game. The dragon has a series of attacks that it cycles through in old-school action-adventure style, and the visuals increase the challenge without making it impossible to understand what's going on. After defeating the dragon, the narrator explains some of what Senua endured under her father's internment.
He tried to fix her with his rituals. Kept her trapped in that hole. She couldn't say which was worse. The darkness. Or the monster that her father had become.
She discovers Dillian's skull, and the Shadow tries to explain itself. It claims to have been trying to make her hate the darkness so she would focus on the quest, and it says it won't hold her back anymore. Fully aware she won't be going home after this, Senua continues. We get some more epic sparring here, and Senua uses her focus to fix what appears to be the final bridge to hell. This far into the game, Senua is basically unstoppable as long as you're paying attention to the voices. Speaking of voices, they start to realize what it would mean if Senua were to die here.
Please, stop. You'll never come back if you go there. There is nothing to go back to.
We only have each other now. Don't abandon me.
Everyone suffers. They were right about me.
Listen to me, not them.
Senua resolves some cognitive dissonance, leaving behind the Senua of old, and enters the final portal to face Hela herself.
This is her hell.
With a clear head, Senua can now make sense of her mother's death, and rediscovers the truth that she had repressed. She finally realizes Sinbel was the shadow all along. I should also mention, if you find all the rune markers scattered throughout each level, you're rewarded with an additional cutscene before this one, in which Druth reveals that Sinbel acted as an informant, helping the Northmen take the village in the first place. So, yeah, fuck that guy.
She has nothing to fear anymore. The gods have saved your mother. Through my hand.
You killed her.
It is the will of the gods.
Fuck the gods! You did this to her! Why?
This is what happens when you listen to the voices of the underworld.
Empowered by a righteous rage, she makes one long push to Hela. And when I say long, I mean it. Unlike most of the game, this last sequence is entirely combat. It's actually pretty cathartic, and apparently that's where Senua's at as well. Unfortunately, like I mentioned much earlier, self-obtained confidence is tough, because if everything her father said was a lie, the darkness, the plague, the gods, then what does that mean for Dillion's soul? What is she doing here if all of this is a fantasy and Dillion can't be rescued? She literally fights against that realization until she blacks out completely. Broken and bloodied, Senua awakens to see Hela standing above her. Finally realizing what all of this means, that Dillion is truly dead, she collapses in sorrow. Or not?
Is that what you want me to believe? After all you've done to me? And to him?
Instead, she quickly fabricates a belief that this whole ordeal must have been arranged by Hela to win her soul, and offers her service in exchange for Dillion. She decides it's that or death, because in death she'll be rid of the darkness. As she appears to pass on, we see another memory of Dillion, providing some solid advice about grieving.
You turn your back on death, and all you can see is the shadow that it casts. The longer you hide from it, the longer the shadow grows until all you can see is darkness.
Can we just all have a Dillion? Ugh. As his reassuring voice fades, we see Hela pick up Dillion's skull and gingerly take it to the edge of this platform before releasing it below. The camera pans back up and it's Senua!
Goodbye, my love.
The idea here being that she's conquered the Hela within, if you will. Rather than be consumed by the darkness and her grief for Dillion, she lets him go and commits to continue living. In true action hero fashion, Senua gives one last look back at the camera and sets us up for a sequel.
Follow us. We have another story to tell.
And you can bet your ass I'll be playing it when it comes out. This game was so fun and moving and unique, while also being a surprisingly accessible and almost nostalgic experience. Ninja Theory killed it, and I'm looking forward to more adventures in Senua's universe. It also says a lot about the quality of this title that my biggest complaint is with the outro song. Just no one thought to give those lyrics a second edit. Anyway, that's what really happened in Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. Probably in more detail than anyone wanted, and with some random psychosocial commentary from me, but I hope you liked it. If you did, you can probably click my face to subscribe for more, or check out one of these videos. One of these boys. Until next time, I love you. Bye.
to the lair of the beast.